This is the Fifth Estate winning headlines, your media police post. In this segment, we summarize some of the headlines that you might have missed this morning. But we also take a look at the political pieces that we call cartoons in this country. Today is the 28th of April, 2020, and I am 2J.
I am JM.
And I am GK, and in case you missed the headlines, here they are. In the Daily Nation, virus fight in crisis over strike threat. In the Standard, Raila's coalition dilemma. And in the Star, Kenyan scientist finds HIV drug to be taken early. So interesting ones there.
Yeah.
Shall we begin with the Standard?
Yeah.
Raila has a dilemma.
So the Standard is telling us that, you know, in the face of COVID-19, there have been speculations of a probable government of national unity being formed before 2022.
Yeah.
And this is before the Kenyatta succession. And the ODM leader, Raila Odinga, is at a crossroads.
Yeah.
Sticking with Uhuru brings the advantage of incumbency at the next election if a government of national unity were to be formed. But that could cause a complication because we're also told in the story that not all of Mount Kenya is with the president in backing Raila. And so RUTO may walk out of Jubilee with his supporters and build a protest alliance with Kalonzo and Mudavadi. And that would scuttle Raila's State House dreams.
Yeah.
That's a speculation, a healthy dose of speculation by the Standard.
I quite like it because, you know, political actors have very disparate and complex goals.
Yeah.
So in 2022, the assumption is that some people still want to be president, such as Raila or Ruto or Uhuru Kenyatta. And so I think it's interesting to try and figure out how these coalitions will look like in the run-up to 2022.
Absolutely.
Yeah. However, I would disagree with what the Standard says, that the BBI train has lost its mojo.
Yeah.
We keep saying this, just because there's a curfew doesn't mean that reggae has stopped.
Yeah.
Reggae starts
It's
at
underground.
7. It starts at 7:01. And I feel like mischief is going on while all of us are at home.
Asleep.
To assume that it's falling apart would be wrong.
Yeah, I want to throw a spanner in the works. What if Raila doesn't want to be president? What if he wants to be kingmaker? What if he's choosing...
Baba went through so much suffering that he can't settle for anything less than presidency.
But he always benefits from, you know, prime minister.
From crisis.
He benefits from handshakes and things like that.
He does, but he also gets shortchanged. And he's like that guy who gets to the top of the mountain and then the stone rolls back.
On him. Sisyphus.
Absolutely,
All right.
the myth of Sisyphus.
We have a 3-part criteria that we use to break down the headlines. We ask ourselves, is it topical or speculative? Is it repetitive or groundbreaking? And is it thoughtful or just plain lazy? I quite like it.
I like it too.
Shall we move to the Daily Nation?
Yeah,
where they're telling us
news.
there's a crisis over the virus fight, the coronavirus. So basically, there might be a looming strike held by the health professionals. The Kenya Health Professional Society is saying that, you know, they're going to issue a strike notice because some of their grievances are not being addressed.
Yeah.
There are health workers who are not receiving their risk allowances.
Yeah.
So those at the bottom of the, you know, frontline workers haven't received it, but the doctors higher up have received their 30,000 shillings a week. But you also have an issue of safety. They're saying that their safety is being taken very casually. They may not have all the gear that they need and the stuff that they need to fight the disease.
And I think if you think about it, the ratio of doctors to nurses, there are far more nurses than there are doctors.
Yep.
Exactly.
In fact, I was looking at a matrix that was developed by the World Economic Forum, if I'm correct, that shows the level of pay versus the exposure to the virus. So we all know doctors are paid quite high, so they're on the high payment, high risk, or maybe medium risk, as opposed to nurses who are on the low pay, high risk, and there are more of them.
Exactly.
So I think if we're not taking serious the people who we throw into the front lines, we're going to have a problem. The nurses striking could be disastrous.
Yes, and I think the reality is we've had a healthcare system that has been overwhelmed and overstretched even before COVID.
Yes.
And so COVID has come and sort of put the spotlight on how overwhelmed a system really can get. So yeah, we need to do better, and I hope they don't go on strike.
There are ways out here. I think the government can apply for some donor funding.
Yeah.
You know, the IMF, the World Bank, all these Bretton Woods institutions,
Yeah.
as well as philanthropists are dishing out money to combat
According
COVID
to
right now.
Twitter, we're receiving a lot of donor funding.
Yeah.
We just don't know where
it's going. Oh.
I'll leave it at that.
Yes.
As for the headline.
Yes, for the
Toss
headline, let's we can toss that.
Very mouthy, yeah.
In the Star, a Kenyan scientist has found a HIV drug.
Yes, so they say that a US-based Kenyan scientist has unveiled the world's first ARV, the antiretroviral drug, that can be taken once a year. So normally, for those who are not familiar with ARV drugs, normally you would take 3 a day. And you have lots of horrible side effects, fever, nausea, vomiting, kidney, liver damage, bleeding. So they've said that with this drug, you would take the injection once, and the tissues that it would enable the body to absorb and release it from the tissues over a 12-month period. Because they say a lot of the time with the ARV drugs, should you forget to take it, it may actually make your body immune to the drugs thereafter. So I think in the face of COVID, I think it's nice to see that we're still developing vaccines for other very serious drugs. One fact I was very surprised to find out is that Kenya is has the fourth largest HIV epidemic in the world. So as of 2019, we have 1.5 million Kenyans living with HIV.
Yeah, and if you contrast this with COVID-19, I mean, HIV is known as a slow sort of
slow killer.
Slow killer. So, but they're saying that this breakthrough is only going to come into the market 5 years from now.
Yes, in 5 years,
Okay.
Interesting story. Again, mouthy headline.
I think the Star wanted to front load the fact that it was a Kenyan.
Which we applaud, of course.
Which we do applaud. Can we give the Standard our winning headline?
Yes,
definitely.
Yes.
I think
there you have it. The Standard gives us our winning headline. Onto the political pieces that we call cartoons in this country, where we also have a 3-part criteria. We ask ourselves, is it humorous or dry? Is it satirical or pessimistic? And is it effective or just plain lazy? So if we begin with the Daily Nation.
Yes.
We have many handshakes going on here. We have a handshake between Baba and Moi. We have a handshake between Kibaki, Moi Kibaki holding his golf stick, and Raila Odinga. And then we also have another handshake with Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga. And then below that you have Raila Odinga with a very long arm, and he says to Ruto, you know, if you become president, the same fate awaits you. But then you have Ruto grimacing and closing his ears in his ears, trying not to hear it. He doesn't want to hear this. But interesting.
I think it's a good cartoon. I mean, who's this? Ndula. He's telling us that a zebra never changes its stripes.
Exactly. And it has some historical context there. You can see that Raila is a man who likes a deal.
Yes, he does.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think most importantly, the cartoon is telling us this, or rather the assumption is that Ruto is eventually going to become president. And Raila's going to do what Raila normally does.
Yes. He's the thorn on the side that you can't escape. Shall we move to the Standard?
Yes. In the Standard, we have Gado. We have here in the background a slum, and we have a child on one side who's standing there, and he says, have you started doing e-learning the government promised to provide? And on the other side, we have a young girl who says, we're still waiting for the laptops they promised 5 years ago.
Broken promises.
It is broken promises. So I think what happened is in 2013, the government promised to give free laptops to all primary school students. And I think that has yet to be fully rolled out. And at the same time, they're having to grapple with having this e-learning at home because schools have been closed for another month, I believe. So, it's so pessimistic.
Totally.
We toss it?
Toss that.
So in the Star, a very funny cartoon, we have our nyami bread. And it says, talk of a nusu mkate government. So on one side, we have Raila on his side of the loaf, pushing it. And then on the back side, you have Uhuru Kenyatta also pushing the loaf. But in the middle, on Uhuru's side, you can see thin slices of bread. And in between them, you have a caricature of DP Ruto. And then on the side there, curiously, on an oversized suit and a very big rungu, inherited from his father, you have Gideon Moi. I quite like this.
So they're telling us that Raila's half of the loaf is bigger than Uhuru's half, which he has to share with Ruto.
Yeah, the impediment is Ruto.
Is DP. And interestingly, where does Gidi fall into this Nusu Mkate scenario?
He's trying to figure out how do
I jump in there?
Probably get a share of Raila's
maybe.
Like a slice or something like that.
I quite liked it.
Two good cartoons
quite
today.
A nice one.
So do we give it to the Star or the Daily Nation?
I would say we give it to...
I say the Star.
Almost as a draw, I would say.
I'm with the Star.
You're with the Star?
I like the Star. Let's
give it to the
them.
Star.
There you have it. Absolutely. The Star gives us our winning cartoon. What is our final thought?
And now our final thought. Today's inspired by a book entitled Multipliers, How the Best Leaders Make Everyone Smarter, written by Liz Wiseman and her co-author McCohen, I can't remember his name, sorry. So she is the CEO of the Wiseman Group, a leadership, research and development firm. Some of her clients include Apple, AT&T, Disney, Facebook, Google, Microsoft, Tesla, Twitter, like a whole just great group of companies. And in fact, in 2019, she was recognized as the top leadership thinker in the world. So that's good for women. So in this book, she outlines the traits of a multiplier leader and how to become one. But she also teaches how to handle a diminisher boss, which you may find that you have in some instances. But one central question in the book is as follows. How do some leaders manage to make everyone around them smarter? Yet other leaders seem to drain intelligence and capability out of the people they work with. And so the book is based on 2 years of research into the defining characteristics and behaviors that separate great leaders from those who are viewed negatively by their teams and by their peers. So Multipliers is based on a premise that any leader can be placed on a spectrum between two categories. On one hand, you have the multiplier. On the other hand, you have the diminisher. And this book investigates the traits between these two types. So a multiplier amplifies or multiplies the intelligence of the people and those around them. They lead their teams and they are able to understand and solve problems rapidly, achieve their goals, and adapt and increase their capabilities over time. On the other hand, you have the diminisher. These people drain the intelligence, the energy, and the capability of those around them. They lead their teams or organizations in silos, so they operate in very different groups. They find it hard to get things done, despite having very smart people, and they seem unable to do what is needed to reach their goals. So those are the two extremes that she talks about. But the problem she outlines in this book, which is quite interesting, is that being a diminisher is more socially instinctive. I think for a lot of people, it's instinctive to just be harsh. But being a multiplier is actually quite easy if you figure out how to get it done properly. So she says, what is the difference? How does one person become a multiplier while another becomes a diminisher? And to answer those questions, Wiseman and her research team studied over 150 leaders. So these are managers, teachers, and sports coaches over 4 different continents to come up with an answer. And they found that the difference wasn't so much in action, in the things that you actually did, but in the attitude that you had towards the people that you had to lead. And they identified 5 key differences. So 1, you have the talent manager versus the empire builder. These are the people who attract and optimize talent or, detract from talent. Number 2, you have the liberator versus the tyrant. These people can create intensity that requires the best thinking possible. 3, you have the challenger versus the know-it-all. Sometimes these are people who extend challenges and ensure direction gets set rather than setting direction themselves. Number 4, you have the debate maker versus the decision maker. So debate makers, they give decisions and directions up front, and they ensure that they don't leave their organizations in the dark. And lastly, you have the investor versus the micromanager, and I think that's quite self-explanatory. They delegate ownership and accountability rather than just micromanaging what their people do on a day-to-day basis. And so this book really got even me thinking about my own leadership styles. And at the end of the day, it gives you tools to be a better multiplier. And I think one key takeaway can be summarized in one sentence from the book. She says that you should internalize the belief that people are actually smart and they'll figure things out on their own. So you don't need to be on top of them constantly. Very interesting.
So in chapter 3, she goes on to talk about the liberator versus the tyrant. So here, if the tyrant, we think of them as being the diminisher in this case. And like you said, tyrants create this very tense environment to work in, and that suppresses people's thinking and capability, and so people hold back and they tend to only give opinions that agree with their leader. They don't want to disagree and they don't want to rock the boat, and they work quite cautiously. And this is what the author then calls the diminisher. But like you said, it requires a path of least resistance. But he says what we should be aiming for is to all be liberators, whether you're at leadership or not, right? Because liberators create this intense environment, it's very intense because you're required to always do your best. But also people offer that bold thinking because they're in that safe space. You're allowed to fail, you're allowed to, speak your voice. And he says that liberators have 3 common practices. And one of them is that, creating that space. They carve out space and they're good listeners. In fact, they're more than just good listeners, they're ferocious listeners because they realize how smart you are is defined by how clearly you can see the intellect of others. So you're able to pick out really good ideas from across the spectrum in whatever group you're in. So and they also, what she calls, they define a space for discovery. So you're able to come up with new interesting innovations because you've allowed for that space to be there. And they also do this by leveling the playing field. So they realize that wisdom doesn't always just come from the top.
Yeah.
It can come from your most junior people, but wisdom can come from anywhere if you allow yourself to just listen. So he gives an interesting story because he says liberators demand the very best thinking, the very best of your work from people. And he gives a story of Henry Kissinger. Kissinger was the US Secretary of State under Richard Nixon. So the story goes that one of his chief of staffs comes and says, gives a report. And so he says, Kissinger asks him, is this your very best work? And the chief of staff responds and says, I think I can do better. So he goes off, and for 2 weeks he makes amendments to his report, and he comes back and he hands it to Mr. Kissinger. Mr. Kissinger keeps this report for 1 whole week, and then he sends it back with a note saying, are you sure this is your best work? So the chief of staff is now like, okay, wait, am I missing something? Am I still missing something? So he continues to amend his paper and work on it and work on it and work on it. This time he goes and hands in the report and says, Mr. Kissinger, this is my best work. And you know what Mr. Kissinger does? He said, okay, this time then I will read it. So it's sort of just pushing the boundaries to say, okay, fine, you're giving me an outcome or something, a product that you think I want, but do you believe that it is your very best work? And so liberators work to always get people to produce their best work. And because they're demanding the best, you also want to put in the best and give that, right? So they give you a standard to which to uphold so that the outcome can be good, but was it an easy outcome? Did you do your best to get to that outcome and have it be good? And most importantly, like I said earlier, liberators give people permission to fail. So that mistakes are an essential part of progress, but creating the environment in which people fail, learn from their mistakes, have that short learning curve, and make better decisions as they go along. That's what I got from
This is a wonderful book, replete with stories like those and many others. And my big takeaway was the contrast between the decision maker and the debate maker. So the author tells us that rather than telling people what to do, we should, and setting targets for people, managers and leaders should strive to be debate makers. And here's a difference. So he gives an example of George W. Bush, a decision maker. So decision makers don't solve problems with analytical thinking, he tells us. And Bush, we are told, led a blink presidency. He had a tendency to make snap decisions in the blink of an eye rather than pausing to consult, research, and weigh the options. President Trump also seems to be of the same inclination.
Very true.
Now, the second guy is the debate maker. Debate makers reach decisions through consensus and extensive deliberation amongst their colleagues. And he uses the example of a renowned Dutch police commissioner known as Arjan Mejerink. When he came into office, the author says, Arjan decided to do away with the traditional top-down hierarchy. So he reorganized the force by adopting the debate maker style of leadership. And you do this in 3 parts. First, by carefully preparing the issues to be debated so that they can be clearly presented to the staff. Second, sparking an engaging and thorough debate that offers a wide variety of voices and opinions. And thirdly, making sure that a strong decision is reached in the end. And so with this transparent and logical process in which everybody has ownership, he was able to implement his reforms in the police force with ease. I'll give another example. From the field of politics. And there's a story about Harold Wilson, the 20th century British politician and prime minister. A canny political operator and arguably the most, I think, politically savvy prime minister Britain had in the 20th century, perhaps just matched by Tony Blair. So in the 1970s, Britain was in the throes of an economic crisis. And economic crises, as you know, also breed political crises. And so in 1974, the National Union of Mine Workers, supporters who are also supporters of the Labour Party, demanded a pay rise from his government, which triggered also a whole host of other industries to do the same. And so rather than openly confront them, Wilson decided to take a different approach. he told the industries to autonomously determine their own pay rises. So he told them, okay, fine, you guys go out there and set your own pay rises as you deem fit. But he gave them a caveat. If they failed to adhere to what he called sensible limits, then he would use emergency measures to enforce tough guidelines. And history shows us that it was a clever convolution that allowed him to appear as though he backed the unions, while in reality he was keeping them in check. I believe these are also the tricks that Daniel Moi used during his presidency to survive Kenyan politics. Very clever. You throw it back to them, kind of make them feel as though they're in control of the process, get them to debate the options. And in the end, you trim them down to size, but in a way that they feel...
They don't realize what's happening.
Yeah,
I like the idea of sensible limits.
And this book is, I think, so useful in this moment as people are adjusting to this new normal in terms of business. So I mean, like, how can you adapt these 5, different types of leadership, maybe when you're having to work remotely, or if you're having to let people go. I think it's
at this time a reflection, any leader or manager leading and managing a big team of people, even 5-10 people, these are the kinds of reflections they should be having and the kind of books
they should be reading. Interesting. So on a day where we had a winning headline from the Standard, a winning cartoon from the Star, I want to leave you with this. On becoming a multiplier, Lao Tzu sums it up best. When I let go of what I am, I become what I might be. And at the Fort Hall School of Government, we always say becoming is better than
being.
That's right.
Amen. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, but also find us on TV. We're on GoTV, Pan Free to Air, and Star Times. Have a lovely evening.